Okay, 1.7, proportional reasoning and conversions. So a ratio compares like quantities because the units are the same. We do not include them. Okay, so like quantities, that's when the units are the same. Okay, there are three ways that we can write a ratio. So we can write it with the word 2, 1 to 2, or we can put 1:2, but as soon as we put this colon, we actually pronounce that like 1 to 2. Okay, or we can write it as a fraction. I personally like this middle one, but you can work with fractions. So that's like the difference. Okay, example 1. If a movie is 30 minutes long, movie A, and movie B is 45 minutes long, then compare the ratio of movie A to movie B. Okay, so we can actually see this word too in our question. So like we're going to compare A to B. So we're going to compare 30 to 45. Okay, so we're going to treat this just like a fraction. Okay, so if we put this in the fraction 30 over 45, if you think about it, we can divide both 30 and 45 to get a simpler fraction. So we can divide 30 by 15 and we get 2. And we can divide 45 by 15 and we get 3. So the ratio is 2 to 3 or 2 to 3 or 2 to 3. Okay, and what this actually means is, like, instead of just saying, like, for every 30 minutes, movie B is 45 minutes, we can quote this as, like, the simple ratio of 2 to 3. For every 2 minutes, movie A is, we say movie B is 3 minutes. Okay, now let's do the same thing, but let's compare the ratio of movie B to movie A. So this time we're going B to A, and the order here is important. So B is 45, A is 30. Let's put this as a fraction, 45 to 30. Okay, again, we're dividing by 15, so same idea, 3 to 2. Okay, and if you were to interpret this question doesn't ask us to interpret this, but our interpretation here is going to be approximately the same. For every 3 minutes movie B is, movie A is 2 minutes. Okay, a proportion is a statement of the equality of two ratios. So a proportion may be written one of two ways. So we can either write it in ratio form, which is like 1 to 6 equals 2 to 12. Okay, or we can write it in fractional form, which is what we just did. We started in ratio, we converted to fraction, worked with it, and then converted it back into a ratio. So fractional form would be like 1/6 equals 2 over 12. Okay, and again, these are like equivalent, right? Equivalent fractions. 1 to 6, 2 to 12, also equivalent. So example 2, solve the following proportions by inspection and ask yourself, what did we multiply one part by to get the other? Okay, so inspection is kind of like take a look and analyze. These ratios are the more difficult ones because the variable is in the denominator. Okay, so 3 divided by 7 equals, and 30 divided by what? So in my head, I'm like, okay, so 3 times what equals 30? Well, 3 times 10. That means we have to do the same thing here, 7 times 10. Okay, so just by taking a look at this, I can tell that x equals 70. Okay, for b, we have 2 over 5 equals 8 over x. So to get from 2 to 8, we had to multiply by 4. And so to get from 5 to x, we're also going to multiply by 4. That means x is going to equal 20. This inspection portion of this question is kind of like a logic. Instead of using proper algebra, we're using logic. Okay, cross multiplication. We can use cross multiplication to solve for portions we cannot solve by inspection. Okay, so the previous two questions were quite easy, so we can just like look and we can tell. But these ones probably not so much. We can do two things. So move numbers across the diagonal and attach them by multiplication, or switch numbers across the diagonal. Okay, so I like to call this like B and C move on a rope and D and A move on a rope. You can either bring the A down here, it would be divided by A, or bring the D up here, it'd be multiplied by D. Okay, same thing with the C and the B. We can bring the B up to be multiplied or the C down to be divided. Now, example 3, solve for x. So x is in the numerator, so life is splendid. Okay, actually, we don't even have to bring the 4 up. We don't have to do both sides. You can choose one side. Actually, put a note there. You may choose one side to do only. Okay, so I don't want to bring the 4 up here because it would create like 4x. So then it's going to create more steps. So I'm going to just strictly bring the 6 up here, and we're going to go 6 times 3. Oops. 6 times 3. This dot here is multiplication, and then divided by 4. And so we're just writing divided by 4 equals x, just like the original. Okay, if you want to cancel these out by a 2, you can, but I'm just going to go 18 divided by 4, and then I'm going to reduce. So both of these divide by 2. I get 9 over 2 equals x. Okay, for the next one. So the x is in the denominator, so that's a little bit more difficult. So I'm going to switch these. I'm going to bring the x up here and the 2 down here. So we're going to have x over 5, right? X is up, equals 15 over, and then the 2 is going to come down. Here again, x and 2 work on a rope, 5 and 15 work on a rope. Okay. Now I'm going to bring the 5 up, leave the x where it is, so we're going to have x equals 15 times 5 over 2. And I use this dot as multiplication because when we're dealing with variables, sometimes it's difficult to differentiate between a variable x and a multiplication symbol x. Okay, so we get 75 divided by 2, so we get x equals 37.5. Since these are equivalent, if we were to plug the 37.5 into this x, or the 9 over 2 into this x, and we were to solve, like we were to put these into our calculators and divide, we're going to get the same answers. And that's because there's an equal sign between them, showing us that they're equivalent. Okay, example 4. You and your family often go visit your grandparents' cottage. On the way to the cottage, the average speed you were traveling in your car is 75 kilometers per hour. Okay, so now we're looking at these units. So 75 kilometers per hour can also be written as 75 kilometers over 1 hour. So that's called a unit rate when we're over like 1 unit. So how many kilometers will you go in 3 hours? And then in 1.5 hours. So in 3 hours, we would make an equivalent fraction. So x, because we don't know the number of kilometers, but we know we are driving for 3 hours. So all we'd have to do here is cross multiply the 3 up, and we'd get 75 times 3 over 1 hour. Well, 1. Let's leave out the units. I'm going to write smaller next time. All right, 75 times 3 is 225. So we would drive 225 kilometers in 3 hours. Okay, and what about 1.5 hours? So again, start from the original, 75 kilometers in 1 hour. Okay, and that's going to equal some number, let's call it y number of kilometers in 1.5 hours. So we can go ahead and leave out, again, kilometers an hour. We can cross multiply, so we get 75 times 1.5 equals y. Also, this divided by 1, it's tedious to put it in. For the original, I would say put it in, but moving forward, in your head, like you can say, okay, I don't have to put this in because divided by 1 gives me the original. Okay, so 112.5y. Or sorry, equals y. So therefore, they travel 112.5 kilometers in 1.5 hours. Okay, so that one was easy because we had the x and the y on the top. Now, if we're considering the exact same fraction, let's do b. How many hours will it take you to travel 200 kilometers? So if you remember, hours is on the bottom, and then kilometers is on the top. We have to be consistent with that. So we're given 200 kilometers, and we don't know the number of hours, so let's just use x. So let's switch x and 75. So I get x equals 200 over 75. Notice how now that the x is up here, I left out the 1 because again, it's tedious. Okay, so let's go ahead and divide 200 divided by 75. X equals, so this comes up to 2 and 2/3 of an hour. Okay, in your calculators, you might get the number 2.666 all the way to 7. Okay, so let's talk about this. Hours are not based 100, hours are based on 60 minutes. In 1 hour. So we can't put 2.6, or we can't say 2 hours and 66 minutes. Okay, a lot of students will say that. Okay, so we're going to take the whole number, so 2 hours, and what we're going to do is we're going to take the 0.66 or the 2/3, and we're going to say, okay, hour is base 60. What is 2/3 of an hour? Okay, so 60 times 2 is 120 over 3, and 120 over 3 is 40. So if you think about 2/3 of an hour, that's actually 40 minutes. So it's going to take 2 hours and 40 minutes to drive 200 kilometers. Okay. C. On the highway, your parents can drive a bit faster. They go 186 kilometers in 2 hours. Okay, so now we're going 186 in 2 hours. At this rate, how long does it take to go? Sorry, typo. 65 kilometers. So 186 kilometers in 2 hours. So 65 kilometers. Again, kilometer on the top, kilometer on the top. Okay, be consistent with that. In how many hours? Okay, so first let's switch because we want the x on the top. So let's switch x and 186. So x comes up here, we have x over 2. 186 comes down, we have 65 over 186. Okay, now we have to cross multiply the 2 up. We get x equals 65 times 2 over 186. Okay, if you want this in 2 different steps, x equals 130 over 186. Okay, so I get this really ugly decimal. I get 0.6989. Okay. Having a fraction doesn't make sense with minutes or hours. So what we want to do is we want to take that fraction of an hour and multiply it by 60. So just leave it in your calculator as is, multiply it by 60, and then we're going to round. So therefore, to drive 65 kilometers, it takes 42 minutes. Okay, use the conversions for feet, yards, and inches below to convert between the units. Okay, so 1 yard equals 3 feet, and 1 foot equals 12 inches. So if we have 6 feet, there we go, 6 feet, and we want this in inches. So let's go, 1 foot is 12 inches, and we want 6 feet, and we want to know how many inches, so x. So again, let's switch the x and the 1. So the x is going to come down, and we're going to have x over 12 equals 6 over 1. Now let's cross multiply the 12 up. X equals 6 times 12. X equals 72. Okay, yards to feet. So I'm going to use this one. 1 yard, so this is in yards, equals 3 feet. And I just put this here just for reference. We have 4 yards, and we want to know how many feet. So let's call that y. So let's go ahead and switch the y and the 1, and we get y over 3 equals 4 over 1. Okay, cross multiply the 3 up, and we get y equals 3 times 4, so we get y equals 12. Oh, I should say 72 inches, and this is going to be 12 feet. So 4 yards is 12 feet. Okay, and the last one, feet to yards. Okay, so this one we don't have a conversion for. Feet to yards. Oh yeah, we do. All right, here we go. 1 yard is 3 feet. Okay, this question gives us 16 feet and wants us to convert it to yards. So we don't know the yards, so let's put a Z there. Okay, this time we just cross multiply the 16 up. We get 1 times 16 over 3 equals Z. So 16 over 3 is 5 1/3. And this is going to be yards. YDS. Okay, so always start with the actual conversion as our first fraction, and then equate it to what we're looking for and what we're given.